For decades, residents of Crestwood pitied the crazy old man starving on Miller's Ridge. Everyone assumed Elias survived the bitter winters through sheer luck inside his rotting, collapsed cabin. They were completely wrong. One routine county assessment accidentally unmasked his shocking reality, a hidden multi-million-dollar agricultural empire. Elias Caldwell was 78 years old, a man who seemed entirely carved from sun-baked leather and stubborn silence. For 40 years he had occupied a 50-acre plot of land on the edge of Benton County, a property universally considered the most worthless stretch of real estate in the Pacific Northwest. From the county highway, Elias's farm looked like a graveyard for agricultural ambitions. Rusting skeletons of 1970s tractors sat half-buried in dry, cracked earth. Thorny blackberry brambles choked the perimeter, and his residence was a sagging, weather-beaten shack with a tin roof that rattled violently whenever the wind blew down from the Cascade Mountains. The residents of Crestwood viewed Elias as a tragic local fixture. Once a month, he would drive his sputtering, backfiring 1988 Ford pickup into town to buy bare necessities, a sack of flour, dried beans, cheap coffee, and salt. He paid entirely in tarnished coins and crumpled, faded dollar bills. Brenda Linus, the plump and endlessly sympathetic owner of the Crestwood General Store, often tried to slip an extra loaf of bread or a tin of peaches into his paper bag. Elias would always catch her, silently place the charity back on the counter, and walk out. Poor old Elias, Brenda would sigh, watching his truck belch dark smoke as it rattled down Main Street. Living on pride and rainwater, I don't know how he hasn't starved to death up on that miserable ridge. Rourke Knox had a different perspective. Knox was a regional real estate developer known for his aggressive acquisitions and slick tailored suits that looked wildly out of place in a farming community. Knox had been quietly buying up distressed farmland around Crestwood for pennies, paving the way for a massive commercial logistics and warehousing hub. Elias Caldwell's 50 acres sat right at the strategic choke point of Knox's planned highway access road. For 3 years, Knox had mailed Elias buyout offers, starting at a laughable $20,000 and eventually capping out at $50,000. Every single letter was returned unopened, boldly marked with a thick red X. Frustrated by the old man's resilience, Knox decided to leverage the local government. He spent weeks smoozing county officials, loudly expressing his concern for the blighted, hazardous conditions on Miller's Ridge, suggesting that Elias was a danger to himself. He heavily implied that the county should step in, condemn the property, or at the very least, audit the old man's allegedly delinquent property taxes. This bureaucratic maneuvering landed the case squarely on the desk of Capriel Mercer. Capriel was a 28-year-old junior agricultural assessor for Benton County. Having grown up on a commercial soybean farm, she possessed a sharp eye for land management and a deep-seated intolerance for corporate bullies like Knox. However, her job required her to investigate the formal complaint. Her supervisor, David Harmon, handed her the file with a grimace. "Just go out there and do a preliminary habitability and tax assessment, Capriel," David instructed, leaning back in his squeaky office chair. "Knox is breathing down our necks, claiming Caldwell hasn't paid taxes in 5 years. If the property is condemned or foreclosed, Knox sweeps it up at auction. I don't like it, but we have to follow the procedure. Bring the old man the official notice." Capriel drove out to Miller's Ridge on a blistering Tuesday afternoon. The winding dirt road leading to Elias's property was completely unmaintained, heavily rutted, and severely tested the suspension of her county-issued SUV. As she crossed the property line, the sheer desolation of the land struck her. The soil on the visible slopes was pale, chalky, and devoid of nutrients, supporting only invasive scrub brush. She parked near the leaning shack, There was no immediate sign of Elias. Capriel grabbed her clipboard and the thick manila envelope containing the county notices. As she approached the porch, the front door creaked open. Elias Caldwell stood in the doorway. He wore faded, heavily patched denim overalls and a worn flannel shirt, but as Capriel stepped closer, her trained eyes noticed subtle discrepancies that immediately clashed with the town's narrative of a starving hermit. Elias was undeniably old, yet he stood completely straight, lacking the frail stoop of malnutrition. His forearms, exposed by rolled-up sleeves, were corded with thick, healthy muscle. Furthermore, the boots on his feet were not the rotting leather husks one might expect. They were heavily scuffed, but extremely high-quality, custom-fitted orthopedic work boots. "Can I help you, miss?" Elias asked. His voice was gravelly but strong, devoid of the weary tremor Capriel usually encountered in destitute seniors. "Mr. Caldwell, I'm Capriel Mercer, with the Benton County Assessor's Office," she said, projecting a polite, professional tone. "I'm sorry to intrude, but I've been sent to discuss your property status and deliver this notice regarding alleged delinquent taxes and a habitability review." Elias didn't reach for the envelope. He leaned against the doorframe, crossing his arms. "My taxes are paid, Miss Mercer, in full, every year. The county records show no payments registered under your name or this parcel number for half a decade," Capriel explained gently, hoping to avoid a hostile confrontation. "If there's been a banking error, we need to sort it out before the land goes to public auction." "There is no banking error," Elias replied flatly. "Check your records again. Tell your boss to look up an entity called Verdant Horizon Management. Then tell Rort Knox to stop sending his vultures to my front porch." Capriel blinked, entirely taken aback by the specific mention of the LLC and Knox's name. "Verdant Horizon?" "Sir, this notice, take it back to town," Elias interrupted smoothly. "I have work to do. Good day, Miss Mercer." He stepped back inside and shut the door with a firm, dismissive click. Capriel stood on the porch for a long moment. She looked around the seemingly dead property. As she turned to walk back to her SUV, the heel of her boot caught on something near the edge of the porch. She looked down. It was a tiny, vibrant speck of bright green organic material, completely anomalous against the pale, dead dirt. She knelt down, swiping a finger across the ground. It was a fragment of a leaf, but not from any native scrub brush. It was thick, glossy, and vibrantly healthy. And clinging to the deep treads of Elias's boot prints on the wooden steps was a residue of soil, not the chalky dead earth of the yard, but dark, loamy, intensely rich potting soil that smelled faintly of volcanic ash and organic fertilizer. Frowning, Capriel climbed into her vehicle. The old man wasn't starving. He wasn't helpless, and he was hiding something entirely inexplicable on this dead ridge. First thing Wednesday morning, Capriel bypassed her daily field assignments and marched directly into the county archives. She logged into the deep-tier property database, ignoring her morning coffee as she furiously typed in the parameters Elias had given her. "Verdant Horizon Management," she muttered under her breath. The search icon spun for several seconds before populating a complex web of financial filings. Capriel leaned closer to her monitor, her eyes widening. Elias was telling the exact truth. The property taxes for the 50-acre parcel on Miller's Ridge were completely up to date. However, they weren't being paid by a local citizen dropping off checks at the courthouse. They were being paid electronically, routed through a high-level corporate escrow account managed by a boutique agricultural banking firm based out of Seattle. Furthermore, the tax payments weren't just the bare minimum. Verdant Horizon Management had voluntarily requested an updated, higher commercial tax bracket assessment 3 years ago, a request that had somehow been buried or misfiled in the county's antiquated system. They were paying 10 times the required property tax for a barren residential lot. Capriel printed the records and slammed them onto David Harmon's desk. "Knox is lying," Capriel stated, pointing to the highlighted figures. "Or he's completely incompetent. Caldwell's land is owned outright, and the taxes are fully funded by this Seattle-based LLC. He's untouchable from a foreclosure standpoint." David picked up the paper, adjusting his reading glasses. "Well, I'll be damned. Verdant Horizon? Never heard of them. Why would a corporate entity be paying premium commercial rates on 50 acres of dead rocks?" "That's exactly what I intend to find out," Capriel said, a spark of genuine investigative thrill igniting in her chest. "Caldwell isn't a crazy hermit. He's a front, or a custodian. When I was out there, I noticed highly enriched soil residue on his boots. Someone is running a covert operation on that ridge." David looked alarmed. "Covert?" "Capriel, if it's illegal narcotics, you need to back off immediately and call the sheriff." "It didn't smell like a localized narcotic grow," Capriel countered, recalling her agricultural science training. "The soil profile was completely wrong for that. I need to do a full topographical and environmental survey. The habitability complaint Knox filed still gives me jurisdiction to inspect the perimeter for environmental hazards." "Just be careful," David warned, "and don't trespass past the residential boundary without cause." Capriel returned to Miller's Ridge late Thursday afternoon, driving an unmarked personal truck instead of the highly visible county SUV. She parked half a mile down the county highway, pulling her vehicle off the shoulder and behind a thick stand of rotting pine trees. She grabbed her surveying equipment, a high-powered digital camera, and a GPS mapping tablet. She hiked up the western flank of the ridge, deliberately avoiding the main driveway and Elias's shack. This side of the property was famously treacherous, a steep, jagged incline of sharp basalt and loose shale that eventually leveled out into a bowl-shaped depression at the center of the 50 acres. Locals always assumed the center of the property was just a continuation of the dead rock face. As Capriel painstakingly navigated the steep incline, the temperature began to subtly shift. The harsh, dry wind of the valley floor faded. By the time she reached the mid-elevation mark, she noticed a distinct change in the microclimate. The air felt heavier, laced with a faint, artificial humidity. She paused to catch her breath, leaning against a massive boulder. That was when she heard it. It was an incredibly low, rhythmic hum, vibrating more in her chest than in her ears. It wasn't the rattling engine of a 1988 Ford pickup. It was the synchronized, ultra-quiet purr of industrial-grade electrical generators and high-pressure water pumps. Capriel untipped her camera, pushing through a dense, seemingly natural barrier of overgrown, thorny brush. Behind the brush, she discovered an anomaly that made her heart race. Bolted directly into the solid rock face was a massive stainless steel pipe, at least 2 feet in diameter. It was painted meticulously with a matte, rock-textured coating to camouflage it from a distance. But up close, the engineering was undeniable. Condensation beaded on the cold metal. It was a high-capacity commercial water intake line, actively pumping thousands of gallons of water uphill. "What on earth are you doing, Elias?" she whispered to herself. She followed the trajectory of the hidden pipe, climbing higher toward the crest of the rocky ridge. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, deceiving shadows across the jagged landscape. As she finally crested the ridge, Capriel dropped to her stomach, crawling the last few feet to avoid being silhouetted against the twilight sky. She peered over the rocky lip, looking down into the massive bowl-shaped depression that made up the hidden heart of Elias Caldwell's property. The breath completely left her lungs. The 50 acres were not a barren wasteland. The dead zone was merely a brilliant, highly engineered perimeter shell. Spanning across the massive sunken caldera was a sprawling, state-of-the-art agricultural compound. Miles of heavy-duty, military-grade camouflage netting colored precisely to mimic dead rock and dry earth from aerial satellite views was suspended on high-tension wire grids high above the valley floor. Beneath this artificial canopy, the land was an explosion of manicured, breathtaking life. Caprielle zoomed in with her camera lens, her mind struggling to process the scale and sophistication of the operation. There were rows upon rows of perfectly aligned, digitally monitored smart greenhouses. Between them stretched vast outdoor orchards containing hundreds of dwarf trees, their trunks painted white to prevent sunscald, their branches meticulously pruned into perfect trellis shapes for maximum light exposure. But it was the fruit that shocked her. Caprielle knew commercial agriculture. She knew apples, pears, and standard citrus. This was entirely different. Through the telescopic lens, she identified clusters of flawless, square-shaped watermelons resting in custom-molded acrylic braces. She saw long temperature-controlled tunnels glowing with soft violet LED lights, housing what appeared to be vines heavy with impossibly large, ruby-red grapes, each bunch individually wrapped in protective mesh. To the far left, a specialized orchard was heavily fruiting with pale, almost luminous white strawberries shielded by automated shading screens. This wasn't a farm. It was a high-security botanical fortress producing the most expensive, highly coveted luxury hybrid fruits on the global market. The Ruby Roman grapes alone could auction for hundreds of dollars a single grape in elite international markets. As Caprielle watched, paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the secret, the hum of the generators shifted pitch. A single father named, but would unravel his intly etched, and the outside smoothly, slid open on hydraulic tracks. A sleek, unmarked, refrigerated transport truck backed quietly into the loading bay. And there, standing on the brightly lit loading dock, barking orders into a modern headset and holding a digital clipboard, was the frail, starving old hermit Elias Caldwell. Caprielle froze as a faint electronic chirp sounded from the rock face directly beneath her. Before she could scramble backward into the brush, a high-intensity, narrow-beam LED spotlight snapped on, blinding her. "You have a terrible habit of ignoring property lines, Miss Mercer." The voice, amplified by a hidden exterior speaker, was unmistakably Elias Caldwell's. The gravelly tone held no panic, only a heavy, disappointed sigh. "Stay exactly where you are," the voice commanded. "The perimeter defense system is automated, and the security dogs are already en route. I am sending an escort drone to guide you down safely." A sleek, matte black quadcopter rose from the valley floor, hovering a few feet from Caprielle's face. Its blinking green light signaled her to follow. Trembling, Caprielle picked up her camera and navigated the treacherous path down into the hidden caldera, guided by the mechanical sentry. When she reached the valley floor, the illusion of the barren ridge vanished completely. The air was rich with the scent of ozone, blooming jasmine, and damp earth. Two massive Anatolian shepherds, easily weighing 150 pounds each, flanked the pathway, watching her with terrifying, silent intelligence. Elias was waiting by the loading dock of the central greenhouse. He had removed his worn flannel shirt, revealing a pristine white thermal Henley. Up close, under the brilliant glow of the agricultural halogens, he didn't look like a hermit at all. He looked like an elite CEO operating out of a secret underground bunker. "I expected the county to send someone eventually," Elias said, crossing his arms. "But I assumed Knox would send one of his paid-off inspectors, not a junior assessor who knows the difference between dead shale and volcanic potting mix." "What is this place?" Caprielle asked, her voice barely a whisper, as she stared at a row of perfectly spherical, golden-hued melons suspended in anti-gravity hammocks. "This," Elias replied, gesturing to the sprawling complex, is the future of climate-resilient agriculture. Or, at least, the funding mechanism for it. He gestured for her to follow him into the main control room. The walls were lined with digital readouts monitoring soil pH, ambient humidity, and nutrient drip rates. "You aren't just growing fruit," Capriel said, her eyes darting across the screens. "These are genetically isolated luxury strains. I recognize the ruby Roman grapes. Those auction for hundreds of dollars a cluster at Sotheby's in New York." Elias offered a dry chuckle. "Sotheby's handles the secondary market. I sell directly to elite syndicates in Tokyo, Dubai, and Geneva." A single father made a decision that would unravel his entire world. The square watermelons you saw are a proprietary hybrid that doesn't just look interesting. They have a shelf life of 6 months and contain double the hydration density of a standard crop. Capriel was stunned. But why hide? With this kind of operation, you could be the wealthiest man in the county. You could buy Rourke Knox 10 times over. Elias's expression darkened. He walked over to a stainless steel counter and poured 2 cups of water from a filtered tap, handing one to Capriel. 30 years ago, my name wasn't just Elias Caldwell. I was Dr. Elias Caldwell, the Senior Director of Botanical Genetics for Apex Agri Corp. I spent my life working alongside brilliant minds, analyzing the data of pioneers like Dr. Norman Borlaug, trying to engineer crops that could survive the severe droughts and dying topsoil we knew were coming. He took a slow sip of water. I succeeded. I developed a genetic sequence that allowed high-yield crops to thrive in incredibly hostile environments with 10% of the normal water requirement. But Apex didn't want to save the world, Capriel. They wanted to monopolize it. They planned to patent the seeds, engineer them with terminator genes so they wouldn't reproduce, and force developing nations into perpetual, crippling debt to buy them. Capriel felt a chill run down her spine. "So, you stole your own research." "I deleted it from their mainframes, packed the original seed stock into a cooler, and vanished," Elias corrected. "Apex has spent 3 decades looking for me. They own politicians, they own land developers, and they own people like Rourke Knox." Capriel's eyes widened. "Knox isn't trying to build a logistics hub. He knows you're here. He suspects," Elias said grimly. "Knox is a corporate acquisition hound for Apex's shell companies. They tracked a few anomalous financial ripples to this region. They know someone is pumping high-end, mathematically perfect fruit into the black market, and they trace the shipping routes to the Pacific Northwest. Knox's job is to acquire every distressed piece of land in Benton County, bulldoze it, and sift through the rubble until he finds me." He filed a habitability complaint to force a county inspection, Capriel realized, the puzzle pieces slamming together. He was hoping the county would evict you so he could seize the property at auction without ever having to legally prove who you are. Elias nodded. "And now that you've seen this, Miss Mercer, we have a profound problem. If Knox gets his hands on this property, he doesn't just destroy my farm. He gets the master genetics stock I've been hiding. He gets the monopoly." Capriel set her water cup down. Her mind, trained to navigate the labyrinth of municipal law and property rights, went into overdrive. "He doesn't have it yet," Capriel said, her voice hardening with resolve. "Knox is playing dirty municipal games, but he made a mistake. He assumed the county assessor's office was full of lazy bureaucrats who wouldn't look past a rusty tractor." Elias looked at her, a glimmer of genuine respect replacing his defensive posture. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we beat the corporate vulture at his own bureaucratic game," Capriel replied, pulling out her county-issued tablet. "Do you have a secure Wi-Fi connection in this bunker, Dr. Caldwell?" Friday morning arrived in Crestwood with the rumble of heavy diesel engines. Rourke Knox, dressed in a pristine tan trench coat, stood at the base of Miller's Ridge, flanked by two massive yellow bulldozers and a crew of private contractors. Beside him stood a nervous-looking local sheriff's deputy. Knox checked his gold Rolex, a smug smile playing on his lips. He had bypassed David Harmon entirely, cashing in a major political favor with a district judge to secure an emergency property condemnation order under the guise of immediate public hazard. It was highly illegal, entirely unethical, and incredibly effective. "Tear down the gate," Knox ordered the lead bulldozer operator. "If the old man comes out, deputy, restrain him for his own safety." "The structure is condemned." The bulldozer roared to life, its massive steel blade lowering toward Elias's rusted iron gate. "Cut the engine," a sharp voice echoed over the roar of the diesel. Knox whipped around. Gabrielle Mercer was marching down the dirt road, her county badge visibly clipped to her jacket. She was accompanied not by a local deputy, but by three men wearing dark windbreakers bearing the bright yellow letters of the USDA Federal Agricultural Investigative Service. "Miss Mercer," Knox sneered, stepping forward to block her path. "You are interfering with a court-sanctioned demolition. I suggest you return to your desk before I have your job." Gabrielle didn't flinch. She stopped 2 feet from Knox, holding up a thick stack of documents stamped with federal seals. "Rourke Knox, this property is no longer under the municipal jurisdiction of Benton County," Gabrielle announced, her voice ringing clear in the crisp morning air. "As of midnight last night, this 50-acre parcel has been officially annexed by the United States Department of Agriculture as a Tier 1 protected experimental research station." Knox's smug expression faltered, a flash of genuine panic crossing his eyes. "That's impossible. It's a derelict wasteland owned by a delinquent hermit." "It is owned by Verdant Horizon Management, an LLC fully funded and operating under federal grants," Gabrielle countered smoothly. "Furthermore, the primary resident, Dr. Alias Caldwell, has just been granted full federal whistleblower protection." The lead USDA agent stepped forward, handing Knox a separate envelope. "Mr. Knox, we have intercepted communications between your firm and Apex AgriCorp regarding the targeted harassment and attempted illegal seizure of classified agricultural assets. You are currently trespassing on federal land. Order your machines to power down, or you will be placed under federal arrest for corporate espionage." Knox stared at the federal warrant, the color completely draining from his face. The slick, corporate predator had been outmaneuvered by a local county assessor and an old man in denim overalls. He wordlessly waved a trembling hand at the bulldozer operators, signaling them to back down. Up on the porch of the sagging, weather-beaten shack, Elias Caldwell stood watching the scene unfold. He didn't gloat. He simply raised a steaming mug of cheap coffee in Gabrielle's direction, a silent salute. The aftermath of the confrontation sent shockwaves far beyond the quiet town of Crestwood. With the federal protection secured, Elias no longer had to hide. The military netting came down, exposing the breathtaking, futuristic orchard to the world. The story of the starving hermit became a global sensation. Major news networks sent helicopters to film the sprawling compound. Elias, refusing to sell out to the massive conglomerates, instead partnered with a consortium of international non-profit organizations. He released the patents for his climate-resilient seeds into the public domain, ensuring that farmers in drought-stricken regions across the globe could feed their communities without being held hostage by corporate greed. He kept the luxury fruit operation, of course. The ruby Roman grapes and white jewel strawberries continued to fund his ongoing research, though he expanded the compound to employ dozens of locals from Crestwood, paying them top-tier wages. Gabrielle Mercer resigned from her position at the county assessor's office. She didn't have to look far for new employment. Elias hired her as the chief director of operations for Verdant Horizon. Years later, the residents of Crestwood still talked about Elias Caldwell, but the whispers of pity had vanished. They no longer saw a crazy old man wasting away on Miller's Ridge. They saw the brilliant architect of a green revolution, the man who turned a dead mountain into the most valuable, life-giving soil on Earth. And they never, ever underestimated the quiet ones again. If you loved this incredible story of a hidden agricultural empire and a brilliant old hermit outsmarting corporate greed, hit that like button right now. Don't forget to share this video with your friends and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling real-life mysteries and astonishing discoveries. Your support helps us uncover the world's most fascinating secrets. Tap the bell icon so you never miss an update.